In the glittering hush of a French restaurant, Seraphine's father raises his glass not in pride, but in quiet condemnation. Sometimes we wish you were never born. The words cut through the warmth of Maison Vert like a blade through silk, and Seraphine felt the weight of years pressing down on her shoulders. She had spent a lifetime trying to win even the smallest flicker of recognition from her parents, only to be met with cold reminders that nothing she did was enough. Tonight, the illusion that her achievement might finally change their hearts shattered beyond repair. The goal of this chapter is simple and brutal: to bring into sharp relief the toxic bond that had defined Seraphine's life, and to show the devastating turn where a celebration of her success became a theater of betrayal. It is the dinner where her family's mask slips completely, revealing the truth she had long feared, that their approval was never hers to earn. Maison Vert gleamed with crystal chandeliers, each one scattering prisms of light across white linen tables. Couples leaned close over plates of delicately arranged entrees, while families toasted milestones with polished restraint. A hush filled the air, broken only by the clink of cutlery and the murmurs of refined conversation. It was the kind of place her parents cherished, not for the food, but for the reputation. Seraphine sat between them, her carefully chosen navy dress smoothing against the chair, her honor cords tucked neatly into her purse. She had imagined this night differently, rehearsing lines of gratitude, imagining her father's proud handshake, her mother's rare embrace. Instead, she found herself shrinking beneath their disapproving glances, like a child again at the kitchen table, being told the Robinson girl had done better. Gregory Vale, her father, wore his charcoal suit like armor, his every movement precise, his words measured. He spoke of cases won and colleagues admired, rarely pausing long enough to acknowledge his daughter across the table. Margaret Vale, graceful in cream and pearls, scanned the room as if searching for acquaintances who might be watching. Her eyes landed on Seraphine only to correct her posture or smooth a stray strand of hair. When the waiter brought champagne, Gregory lifted his glass. "To graduation," he said flatly. Not to Seraphine, not to her work, but to the event itself. She clinked her glass against theirs, fighting the sting of disappointment, and tried again. "I have some good news," she began, her voice steady though her heart quickened. "I was offered a position at the Hawthorne Center for Human Development in Rainhaven. I'll be working directly under Dr. Annika Weiss on a study about adolescent resilience." Her father set down his fork. "And what does a research associate earn?" she told him. The figure was respectable, even promising, but his mouth curled into disdain. "That is what our junior paralegals make. At least they have potential for advancement." Margaret waved her fork as though swatting away a fly. "Darling, it sounds like filing papers and fetching coffee." And Seraphine, her voice lowered to a critical whisper, "You really should be careful. All this studying has added weight. No one takes a heavy woman seriously." The conversation spiraled into familiar patterns, every attempt Seraphine made to show her passion and purpose dismissed, belittled, or mocked. The restaurant's warmth turned suffocating, the laughter of other families nearby a cruel reminder of what she lacked. She felt the room closing in, her heart pounding, her hands trembling as she tried to hold on to composure. Then, with the casual cruelty of a man discussing business, Gregory delivered the final blow. When we look at the other parents today, celebrating children who will become doctors, lawyers, leaders, we cannot help but feel disappointment. Sometimes we wish you were never born. Then we wouldn't have to explain your choices to our friends. Silence engulfed the table. Even the waiter approaching with dessert menus faltered, retreating at once. The chandeliers above seemed to dim, the clinking of cutlery around them muted, as if the room itself recoiled from the words. Seraphine's mind flooded with memories: her grandmother Agnes's encouragement, the secret psychology books hidden beneath her mattress, the letter urging her never to dim her light. She realized in one agonizing moment that the love she craved would never come, not here, not ever. Her hand steadied as she placed her napkin on the table. She rose, drawing herself to her full height, though her voice, when it came, was calm and even, a quiet storm breaking at last. If that's what you wish, then consider me as if I never existed. Live your lives as though there was never a daughter named Seraphine. The restaurant went silent. A spoon clattered onto tile in the distance, the sound ringing in the hush. Every gaze in the room seemed to fall upon her, but for once she did not flinch. She lifted her purse, squared her shoulders, and turned away from the table that had been her prison for 29 years. Then consider me as if I never existed. The restaurant falls into silence. In her car outside the restaurant, Seraphine collapses against the steering wheel, sobs shaking her body until headlights from a passing car illuminate her tear-streaked face. The taste of champagne still lingered bitterly on her tongue, mixed with the ache of words that could never be unsaid. She gasped for air, her chest rising and falling in uneven waves, the sound of her own grief filling the cramped silence of the car. As the tears blurred the world outside her windshield, a memory returned with startling clarity. Her grandmother Agnes's soft voice in a kitchen filled with the smell of cinnamon tea. "You have a beautiful mind. Never let anyone dim your light." The words rose like a lifeline now, shimmering in her memory, hinting that this devastation might become the beginning of something else, something reborn from ashes. The night's purpose had been stolen from her, but this moment, though jagged and raw, carried its own goal. Seraphine needed to reach for clarity, to confront the wreckage of her family's betrayal, and to take the first fragile steps toward independence. What began as collapse would have to harden into decision, because if she stayed in their shadow, she would never escape their grip. Boston's streets stretched ahead of her, pools of light spilling from lampposts across slick pavement. She wiped her eyes roughly, turned the key in the ignition, and let the hum of the engine guide her away from Maison Vert's glass walls and chandeliers. Her tires hummed against the asphalt until she pulled up to a small brick building where the windows glowed with familiar warmth. Tessa's apartment, cluttered but safe, smelled faintly of coffee and old books even before Seraphine climbed the narrow stairs. When Tessa opened the door, her eyes widened at the sight of her friend. Seraphine stumbled inside without words, dropping her purse, and Tessa pulled her into an embrace that squeezed the brokenness out of her chest. A blanket was draped across her shoulders. The couch pulled her down like a refuge, and soon a mug of tea steamed in her trembling hands. The heat stung, but it anchored her back into her body. "They said they wished I had never been born," Seraphine whispered at last, the words cracking as they left her lips. Tessa's jaw tightened. "Then they do not deserve you." Her voice was sharp, unflinching. "Not one bit of you." Within an hour, Noah arrived, the thud of his boots in the hallway followed by the familiar knock that had always brought laughter in gentler times. He carried a bag of groceries and a carton of ice cream, his presence filling the room with protective steadiness. He listened quietly as Seraphine repeated the scene, his hand resting firmly on hers when she faltered. "You cannot go back," Noah said firmly. "If you do, they will destroy you piece by piece until there's nothing left." The apartment filled with the ordinary rhythms of late-night comfort spoons scraping against ice cream cartons, the hiss of the kettle refilled again, the soft hum of Tessa's old heater rattling in the corner. Yet beneath these domestic sounds lay something seismic, the birth of a decision. Seraphine lifted her head, eyes red but determined. "I have to disappear," she said. "I need to leave them behind completely." Tessa nodded, unsurprised. "Then that is what you will do, and we will help you." Over the next days, the plan took shape. Seraphine opened a new bank account, transferring her savings from the joint account that had tethered her to Boston. She canceled her phone contract and secured a new number. She closed her social media profiles and created new ones under variations of her name, locked with privacy settings. Each step felt like cutting another cord that had bound her since childhood. The hardest task was writing the check. She sat at Tessa's table, pen trembling as she scrawled out the figure. Every dollar her parents had contributed after Agnes's death, returned without ceremony. Alongside it, she wrote a single sentence. "This clears any obligation between us." Her tears fell on the paper, leaving faint spots that dried into evidence of both grief and liberation. When the envelope was sealed, she felt lighter, though exhaustion pressed against her ribs. She was severing not just money, but the last tie they might ever use to claim ownership of her. The night before she was to pack the first boxes, Tessa and Noah sat her down at the kitchen table. Noah placed a small sealed envelope in her hands. Tessa's eyes softened as she said, "Don't open it until you reach Rainhaven. Promise us." Seraphine traced the edges of the envelope with her fingers, the weight of it mysterious and reassuring. She looked at the two faces across from her, the friends who had become truer family than blood could ever be, and felt a fragile spark of hope kindle in her chest. She tucked the envelope safely into her bag, her heart pounding with the sense that something significant waited inside. As the old clock on the wall ticked toward midnight, she whispered, half to herself and half to them, "Tomorrow everything changes." Tessa reached across the table, squeezing her hand, while Noah gave a single resolute nod. The heater clicked off, leaving the room in a deep quiet, broken only by Seraphine's steady breath as she clutched the envelope that would travel with her into a new life. "Don't open it until you reach Rainhaven." Dawn breaks as Seraphine's small Honda Civic pulls onto the highway, trunk packed with boxes, a symbolic escape from Boston into the unknown. The road stretched ahead of her like a ribbon leading away from everything she had known and toward the fragile possibility of freedom. Each mile marker that flashed by in the pale light of morning seemed to whisper that she was leaving behind more than a city. She was leaving behind a history that had always kept her small. Her father's toast from that dinner, the cruel dismissal of her path, echoed in her mind. Yet it was countered by another memory, gentler and glowing. Her grandmother Agnes's letter, written in a hand that trembled slightly with age, returned to her thoughts. "The world needs more hearts like yours." That contrast became a compass for her, the condemnation of her parents a shadow that no longer bound her, and her grandmother's faith a light guiding her forward. The sealed envelope from Tessa and Noah sat on the passenger seat, waiting, its weight promising something she did not yet understand. The goal of this journey was more than arrival at Rainhaven. It was transformation. The act of driving cross-country was a shedding of old skin, a release of chains, and a rebirth into the woman she was meant to be. She stopped first at a small diner along the Connecticut border, where truckers sipped black coffee and a jukebox hummed old country songs. She slid into a booth by the window, her hair still mussed from the restless night before. The waitress poured her a steaming mug and smiled, as if sensing something unspoken. "Long road ahead?" she asked. Seraphine nodded. "The longest," she replied softly. The ordinary kindness of strangers steadied her, reminding her that life beyond her parents' world was filled with people who could offer warmth without demand. Days passed in rhythm, long stretches of highway, the hum of tires across pavement, motels with neon signs buzzing against the night, and diner counters where she ate eggs and toast alone. At night she carried a notebook into which she poured her thoughts, reflections on childhood, fragments of hope, questions about who she might become. Each entry felt like unspooling a thread that had been knotted for years. As the Midwest plains opened before her, endless and golden beneath a vast sky, she felt the weight of Boston lifting. She could almost hear Agnes's laugh in the wind rushing past her windows, as though her grandmother was riding with her, reassuring her that she was not alone. By the time she reached the mountains, snow still lingering at their peaks, Seraphine had begun to imagine herself not just surviving, but thriving. She pictured herself standing in a new city, holding her own keys, wearing her own identity like a crown rather than a burden. It was on the final day of her journey, when the skyline of Rainhaven emerged from mist and drizzle, that she finally opened the envelope. She parked on a quiet side street beneath dripping trees, hands trembling as she tore the flap. Inside was a card with a handwritten message. "Family is who loves you as you are. We are your family now and always." Tucked into the fold was a delicate silver necklace, a small pendant shaped like a phoenix rising from flames. Seraphine pressed it to her palm, tears welling. The symbol was clear. From ashes she would rise, stronger, remade. Her studio apartment in Rainhaven was small, a single room with creaking floors and rain-smeared windows, but it was hers. She placed the phoenix pendant around her neck before unpacking, feeling the cool metal settle against her skin like armor. That night, with only a lamp glowing beside her bed, she lay awake listening to the rain on the roof and realized she had crossed a threshold she could never return from. On her first day at the Hawthorne Center for Human Development, she dressed with care charcoal skirt, blue blouse, pendant shining at her collar. The building loomed with clean lines of glass and steel, a monument to knowledge and research. Inside, the air buzzed with purposeful energy. Dr. Anika Weiss greeted her with a firm handshake and keen eyes. "I have high expectations for you, Seraphine Vale," she said. For the first time, Seraphine believed she could meet them. The day passed in a blur of orientation meetings, introductions, and tours of laboratories. Yet beneath the professional rhythm pulsed a deeper current. She was where she belonged, and no amount of parental disapproval could diminish the legitimacy of her place. That evening, as she arranged her books on a modest shelf and brewed tea in a chipped mug, her laptop pinged. She frowned, opening the screen, expecting some administrative message from the Institute. Instead, a single subject line glared back at her from her inbox, the sender unmistakable. From Gregory and Margaret Vale. The message read only, "We need to talk. Please respond." Her breath caught, the serenity of her new apartment rattled by the intrusion of old ghosts. She closed the laptop slowly, the sound of rain intensifying against the window as if the city itself held its breath. Her work email pings for the first time, an unexpected message from her parents, demanding a meeting. Seraphine sits at a corner table of a bustling cafe, the phoenix pendant resting against her collarbone, as the door swings open and her parents stride in. The sight of them was like an echo from another life. Gregory with his rigid shoulders and quick, authoritative strides. Margaret with her pearl necklace gleaming against her dress, scanning the room as if she were arriving at a social gala instead of a meeting with the daughter she had once disowned in words. Seraphine's pulse quickened, yet her hands remained steady around her coffee cup. She had prepared for this moment, rehearsed it in therapy, imagined how it might unfold. The memory of their voices at Maison Verte still pulsed inside her. Her father's disdain, her mother's silence, and those words, "We wish you were never born," had never dulled, never lost their sharpness. Now, as she watched them cross the cafe floor, she felt the air tighten with the threat of those same patterns repeating. But she was not the same woman who had walked out of that glittering dining room. She carried Rainhaven in her heart, her work at Hawthorne in her mind, and the strength of her friends and partners standing quietly behind her. This meeting had one clear goal: to confront the past directly, to assert boundaries, and to define what contact, if any, could look like going forward. The 30 minutes she had allowed would not undo decades of harm, but it would show her that she no longer lived under their control. The cafe was alive with Saturday chatter, mugs clinking against saucers, baristas calling out names over the hum of the espresso machine. A window beside her table framed the rainy street, umbrellas bobbing like dark petals as people hurried by. The ordinary comfort of the setting seemed to mock the extraordinary weight of the moment, but it also gave Seraphine courage. Around her, life continued. Gregory reached her table first, extending his hand as though this were a business transaction. "Seraphine, you look well." he said with practiced neutrality. Margaret leaned in as though for a hug, but Seraphine remained seated, gesturing politely to the chairs across from her. They sat, their movements precise. Margaret's eyes swept over her daughter with critical detachment. "You have lost weight," she remarked, as though it were the most urgent observation to make after years of silence. Seraphine didn't rise to the bait. "How did you find my work email?" she asked evenly. "Connections," Margaret said, vaguely, her tone carrying the old superiority. Gregory cleared his throat. "Your behavior has been distressing to your mother. The way you left that dinner, the silence, the absence at family gatherings, it was immature and hurtful." The words almost made her laugh. They were so rehearsed, so blind to their cruelty. She leaned forward, her voice steady. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" Gregory waved a hand dismissively. "Everyone says things in the heat of the moment. You told me you wished I had never been born," she replied, letting each word settle into the air like a stone dropped into water. That wasn't heat of the moment. That was the culmination of a lifetime of criticism and conditional love. Margaret stiffened. "We have always wanted what is best for you." "No," Seraphine said firmly. "You have always wanted what you thought was best for yourselves. A daughter you could present as an achievement, not a person you could love unconditionally." The silence that followed was uncomfortable, even for them. Gregory shifted in his seat, his composure cracking for a brief instant. Margaret's fingers twitched at her pearl necklace. She glanced at the clock above the counter. 10 minutes gone. She had 20 left. "Here is what you need to understand," she said, her tone calm, almost clinical. "I have built a life here. I have friends who value me, work that matters, and peace. If you want to be part of that life, there are conditions. First, you acknowledge the harm you caused, not just that dinner, but throughout my life. Second, you respect my boundaries and choices. Third, you accept that any relationship we build must be based on mutual respect, not control." Her father's jaw tightened. "And if we cannot agree to that, then we remain as we are," she said simply. "I will continue my life without you." For the first time, Gregory had no immediate retort. Margaret's eyes grew wet, but no apology came. They seemed cornered, forced into silence by the clarity of her words. Her 30 minutes were nearly up. She stood, adjusting the strap of her bag across her shoulder. From her pocket, she drew a napkin on which she had written a single email address. She slid it across the table with deliberate calm. "This is the only contact information I'm willing to share. If you decide you can meet my conditions, you may reach me here. But understand this manipulation, guilt, or demands will not receive a reply." Gregory looked down at the napkin, his face tight with frustration, while Margaret stared at her daughter as though she were seeing her for the first time. Seraphine turned to leave, her pendant catching the light as she rose. The cafe noise returned around her, a reminder that life outside this table went on, unaffected by old wounds. Sliding a napkin across the table, she gives them a single email address. "If you can meet my conditions, you may reach me here." Seraphine opens her mailbox to find a cream-colored envelope from her parents inside, a stiff birthday card with an awkward note. "Proud of your dedication." She stood in the hallway of her apartment building staring at the words, unsure whether to laugh or cry. The handwriting was unmistakable, her father's slanted script, the words clipped and formal as though written for a business associate rather than his only daughter. It was the first time in months she had heard from them since the meeting at Harbor and Hearth. She turned the card over in her hands, feeling the weight of its silence. It offered no true apology, only a polite acknowledgement that barely skimmed the surface of all that had been left unsaid. Yet, deep inside, she remembered her grandmother Agnes's letter years ago, "Your compassion is your strength." That reminder lingered like a whisper. Compassion could not erase betrayal, but it could help her navigate the uncertain space between rejection and tentative contact. The chapter of her life unfolding now carried a clear goal. She needed to determine whether her parents' attempts at reaching out held even a grain of sincerity, or if they were just veiled attempts to pull her back under their control. The stakes were not just about communication. They were about her peace of mind, the stability she had built, and the loyalty of the chosen family who stood by her. Her Rainhaven apartment reflected the life she had made. Second-hand furniture filled the corners, a sturdy oak table, 2 mismatched chairs, a soft rug in shades of blue she had bought at a neighborhood market. The bookshelf was heavy with psychology texts and framed photographs of Lena and Julian at summer picnics, of Sophia's family Thanksgiving, and of a beach day that had left them all sunburnt but laughing. The walls held no trace of Boston, no stern portraits or suffocating family heirlooms, only reminders of warmth and joy she had discovered far from her parents' reach. Julian Hart sat at the table when she showed him the card that evening. His brow furrowed as he read the line, his hand resting over hers. "It sounds like an effort," he said gently, but not an apology. "The question is, does it move you closer to healing or drag you back into pain?" Dr. Caleb Mercer echoed similar thoughts during her next therapy session. "You must separate gestures of guilt from gestures of genuine change," he told her. "If they are acting only to soothe themselves or preserve appearances, it is not about you. It is about their image." His calm voice steadied her resolve. Emails began to arrive every few weeks. Sometimes they admitted to being overly critical. Other times they slipped into old language phrases about obligations, appearances, and expectations. Seraphine chose carefully which ones to answer. When her father wrote, "Perhaps we were too harsh at times, but we always meant to guide you," she did not reply. But when her mother wrote, "I have been thinking about how I never asked how your work made you feel," Seraphine answered with a brief message. Her replies were firm, respectful, and short. She would not open doors wide enough for manipulation to creep in. As December came, Lena invited her to join the Soto family for Thanksgiving. Their home was noisy, filled with laughter, the scent of roasted turkey, cinnamon pies cooling on the counter, and cousins sprawled across the carpet playing board games. Seraphine sat at the long wooden table, while Lena's mother insisted she take second helpings, and her father told old stories about learning English when he first arrived in the country. Seraphine felt the warmth spread through her like firelight on a cold night. This, she thought, was what family could be: messy, noisy, imperfect, but unconditional. That evening, as snow began to fall lightly outside, Julian pressed her hand under the table. "See the difference?" he whispered. "This is how it feels when you are wanted for who you are." Tears pricked her eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition. She no longer needed her parents' approval to feel whole. Yet the peace was fragile. Later that night, after she returned to her apartment, her phone buzzed with a new email. The subject line carried her father's directness. "We have something important to discuss. It concerns the family name." Her stomach tightened as she read it, the words heavy with implication. The room around her, so warm with memories of the day, seemed suddenly colder. The card, the emails, the tentative gestures, all of it now pointed toward a new revelation. Something they had withheld, something that might shake the ground beneath her carefully rebuilt life. Late that night, another email arrives from her father. "We have something important to discuss. It concerns the family name." Standing at a podium at a national psychology conference, Seraphine grips her notes as the audience quiets, waiting for her to speak. The ballroom was filled with rows of chairs, polished wood gleaming under bright lights, the soft shuffle of programs echoing as people settled in. She took a breath, feeling the cool weight of the phoenix pendant against her collarbone, and for a fleeting moment she thought of that night at Maison Verte, when she had walked away from her parents' table, with her voice unshaken for the first time. That memory hovered like a shadow, but it no longer defined her. Now, her presence at this podium promised something else entirely: a rebirth, and a claim to the life she had built with her own hands. She thought of the sealed envelope from Tessa and Noah, opened years ago in her parked car under Rainhaven's gray skies, and of the necklace that had become her anchor. It had been a symbol then, but now it was part of her. The words her grandmother Agnes had once written, "The world needs more hearts like yours," carried forward, foreshadowing this very moment where her heart and her work would be seen on a stage large enough to matter. This chapter was about closure and triumph. The goal was not to reclaim her parents' approval, but to prove, to herself and to the world, that her worth had never rested in their hands. Through her work and resilience, she would demonstrate that justice in the family realm could be found not in revenge, but in rising higher than the betrayal meant to destroy her. The conference setting in Washington, D.C., pulsed with intellectual energy. Banners for the event hung from the high ceilings, tables outside displayed books and journals, and the smell of coffee from paper cups lingered in the air. Attendees, scholars, therapists, graduate students, leaned forward with anticipation. It was a world so different from Boston's social clubs and curated galas, yet it carried a weight all its own. Julian Hart sat among the crowd, his steady gaze fixed on her, quiet encouragement radiating from his presence. His support was not flashy or demanding. It was a hand at her back, a reminder that she was not alone. Colleagues she admired nodded at her, ready to listen. Gregory and Margaret Vale were nowhere in sight, though in her bag sat another unopened email from them. Its presence was like a stone, but tonight it would not drag her down. Seraphine began her talk, her voice at first tentative, then firm as she described her team's study on adolescent resilience. She spoke of the power of emotional validation, of the ways young people could flourish when their feelings were recognized rather than dismissed. She wove data with stories from participants, her words carrying both authority and compassion. As she moved through her slides, she saw the audience leaning forward, pens scratching, eyes meeting hers with recognition. Midway through, her nerves dissolved. She felt a current rise within her, the clarity of speaking her truth. She thought of Agnes, of Tessa and Noah, of Lena's family at their crowded Thanksgiving table, of Sophia's laughter, of Julian's hand holding hers under the candlelight. Each memory built into a chorus that drowned out the old voices of disdain. She realized she was no longer speaking only about research, she was speaking about survival, about the transformation of pain into strength. The climax of her talk came when she paused, letting silence stretch just long enough. "Your worth," she said, her voice clear, "is inherent. It is not given or taken by those who fail to see you. It exists in you, and it can never be erased." Applause began before she even finished the last word. The sound rolled over her like a tide, warm and undeniable. Colleagues approached afterward, shaking her hand, praising her insight. "Your research is groundbreaking," one professor said. Another added, "The way you connected theory to lived experience, it was unforgettable." Julian's smile across the room was brighter than any accolade. Yet amid the celebration, Seraphine felt the quiet tug of unfinished business. Her phone, tucked in her bag, still held her parents' email. She could choose to open it or leave it unread. For the first time, the choice felt like hers alone, not a demand echoing from their voices. She glanced at the phoenix pendant, its silver catching the light as if answering her unspoken thought. Her presentation ended, applause fading into conversations, the conference hum returning around her. She stepped away from the podium, her heart steady, her path clear. For years, she had feared she was not enough. Tonight proved otherwise. She touched the pendant gently, a smile curving her lips as she whispered under her breath, "This is only the beginning." In the end, Seraphine's story reminds us that betrayal often comes not from strangers, but from those we trust the most. Her parents' cutting words at a celebration meant to honor her were the culmination of years of criticism, rejection, and impossible expectations. Yet from that very moment of devastation, she began to rise. Out of ashes came a fire, and out of rejection came resilience. It is a testament to how loyalty is not measured by blood, but by the hands that reach for you when you are falling. She found true family not in her father's approval or her mother's empty compliments, but in the friends who brought tea to her trembling hands and ice cream to ease her tears. Justice came not through revenge in the form of cruelty, but through the bold act of saying no, of setting conditions, of demanding respect. In doing so, Seraphine showed us that sometimes the greatest justice is living well and refusing to bend again under the weight of cruelty. There were moments when the road was lonely, when motel rooms hummed with silence and the past whispered doubt into her heart. But she pressed on, guided by the memory of her grandmother's faith and the kindness of chosen companions. Each mile, each step, and each act of defiance carried her closer to the life she was meant to live. By the time she stood at the podium in Washington, D.C., the applause filling the hall was not only for her research, it was for the courage that had brought her there. Her parents made small attempts at reconciliation, halting and imperfect. Yet Seraphine had learned to weigh words against actions, and to protect her peace above appearances. The child who once bent under criticism had become the woman who could look into their eyes and calmly state her conditions. She reclaimed her story, not by erasing her past, but by rewriting her future. The lesson of her journey is one every family should take to heart. Loyalty is proven through action. Betrayal leaves scars, and justice can be found in setting firm boundaries. What we inherit from our families is not just money or possessions, it is the way we are treated, the values we are taught, and the respect we are given. Sometimes, the richest inheritance is the courage to say no and the strength to build a new life. For those listening at home, reflect on what family has meant in your life. Was it always loyalty? Or have you too felt the sting of betrayal behind closed doors? Remember that blood does not bind us as tightly as love does. True family are the ones who choose us every single day, who remind us of our worth even when we forget. Seraphine's phoenix pendant is more than jewelry. It is a symbol for all of us. It tells us that from pain can come power, from ashes can come flight, and from rejection can come rebirth. She proved that the philosophy remains. Your worth is inherent, not earned, and no one can take it from you. So when the storms of betrayal darken your life, may you remember her story. May you find strength in loyalty, justice in truth, and family in those who stand by you. And may you never forget that redemption lies not in their acceptance, but in your refusal to surrender your dignity. If this story touched your heart, then write number 1 in the comments. And do not forget to subscribe to our channel to hear the next story of betrayal, secrets, and redemption that might remind you of your own life. Because every family hides a story, and every story holds a lesson we all must learn.